Melodic minor is a really beautiful, rich, tonic minor sound that you definitely want to have in your vocabulary. I think very often when you start working with melodic minor, then a lot of students just immediately get lost in altered scale and Lydian dominance and Locrian Natural too. And that's of course fine, you can use it for that, but it is really a lot easier to just start with the basic melodic minor sound and really get that into your ear. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can start working with a tonic minor sound, making some licks, finding some material that you can use, and then I'm going to show you how you can transition that into some of the other applications like altered scale and Lydian dominance. My name is Larsen, learn jazz, make music. Since this is about internalizing a sound, then it's a good idea to have a place in a real piece of music where you can use the material that I'm gonna cover, where you can really hear how it actually sounds when you're playing it. You probably already know Autumn Leaves in G minor, and if we take the first 8 bars of Autumn Leaves and then look at the last 2 bars in that section, then that is 2 bars of G minor as a tonic minor chord. And that will work with the examples that I'm going to cover here. A tonic minor chord is either a G minor 6 or a G minor major chord. And just to hear how that works, if we take a 2-5-1, so just a cadence in minor, then that would sound like this. It's probably also worth pointing out that if you know the most common arrangement of Autumn Leaves, then that riff that's in there is actually a G minor 6 arpeggio. You can see the melodic minor scale as being derived from the natural minor scale. So if we have G natural minor, which is of course the same note set as B flat major, then that would be this scale. And in this case, then what you change is that you take the 6th and the 7th and move them from being flat 6 and flat 7 to a major 6 and a major 7, and then you get this scale. And if I play that in a position, it sounds like this. The way that we think about the melodic minor scale in jazz is a little bit simpler than the way you think about it if you're checking out some classical theory. And that's because in classical music you would have an ascending melodic minor, which is the melodic minor scale that I'm talking about now, and then you would have natural minor as the descending version. We don't have that in jazz, we just have one sound that's the ascending melodic minor. And that's also because if you were playing chords behind somebody who's improvising and they are changing the scale depending on whether they're playing up or down, then you would also have to change the chord. Another thing is also that we just really like the sound of the ascending melodic minor, because that means that we can play lines like this, which would then in a classical approach be something like this. Sometimes people want to call using melodic minor like this jazz minor, but I don't really like that term, so I just call it melodic minor. If you want to improvise with a melodic minor scale, then now we have the scale, but it's useful to have some more material that you can use when you're coming up with licks or melodies. For that, you could check out some of the basic harmony that's contained within the scale. Now, to start with something really simple, let's just go over the basic diatonic triads. So in the scale, we have first a G minor triad, then an A minor triad, then a B flat augmented triad, C major, D major, and then E diminished triad, and an F sharp diminished triad. And the next logical place to go is to check out the diatonic 7th chords. That would be this. So the diatonic harmony we have now is G minor major, A minor 7, B flat major 7 sharp 5, C7, D7, E half diminished, and F sharp half diminished. Now we have some raw material that we can use when we're making licks, and we just need to figure out which triads and which arpeggios work really well to get the tonic minor sound across. Since you want to improvise over a tonic G minor chord, then the G minor major arpeggio will work really well. So that will be this one. And the arpeggio from the 3rd, of course, shares most of those notes and then just adds an extra 9th on top. So that works as well. So that's a B flat major 7 sharp 5. And another one that's really useful is to have the E half diminished arpeggio in there. And that's because if we take the E half diminished arpeggio, so that's in fact just an inversion of a G minor 6, which is sort of the other sound that we have for the tonic minor chord, so this note set. When it comes to triads, then we can just look at which triads do we actually have available now if we just look at the 7th chords. And that means that we have a G minor triad, and we have a B flat augmented triad, and then from the B flat major 7 sharp 5 we have a D major triad as well, and then we also have an E diminished triad. First, I'm going to take this material and then I'm going to show you how you can create some really great sounding tonic minor chord melodies. And then I'm going to take the same material and really just turn that into some altered dominant lines and some Lydian dominant lines. This example starts with a B flat major 7 sharp 5 arpeggio, so going down to the F sharp here. Then I'm going into a G minor triad, which actually turns out to be an E half diminished arpeggio, and then a D major triad, ending on the 6, the E, really to get that melodic minor sound across. Of course, you also want it to sound like jazz, and a part of that is also to use a bit of chromaticism. So here I'm beginning with a chromatic enclosure, really targeting the B flat, the 3rd of the chord. From there I'm playing the triad, so just the B flat augmented triad, moving on to an E diminished triad. And then we get some more sort of loose material, which is just an A and an F sharp, pointing to the G, and then ending on the D, the 5th of the chord. One of the things that work really well with melodic minor harmony, both on tonic minor but also altered dominance or Lydian dominance, is using triad pairs, and that's what I'm using here. So the triad pair I'm using is a D major triad and then an E diminished triad. And I'm starting with the D major triad, so like this, then continuing with the E diminished triad, and then another melody that is coming out of a D major triad. And then from here I move on to a scale run, and then down a D major triad to get the major 7 out on the minor chord. The material that I've covered so far that works really well for the melodic minor when you're using it on a tonic minor chord actually also works really well if you want to use it for some of the other melodic minor sounds, like the altered dominant sound or the Lydian dominant sound. So if we want to take this material and then move it over to an altered dominant, so in this case we're of course talking about G melodic minors, and the altered dominant is found on the 7th degree, so in this case that's an F sharp, so we have an F sharp altered, and that's the dominant of B major. So if I take one of the lines that I made for the tonic minor chord and then move that in and try to make that into an F sharp altered line, then that will sound like this. So first a bit of octave displacement on the C sharp minor chord, scale run, and then really what this is just taking the first part of the first G minor example, which is of course the B flat major 7 sharp 5, and then the beginning of a G minor triad, and then resolving that down to the 9th of B major, and then just running down the chord, ending on the 5th. The Lydian dominant is found on the 4th degree of the scale, so in this case that's a C, so we have a C7. Now a good Lydian dominant sound to explore is the backdoor dominant, and C7 is the backdoor dominant in D major. A sort of typical backdoor dominant progression would be first 4 chords, so G, G major 7 to C7, and then resolving to D major 7. That could sound like this. So first a really basic G major line, and then moving into the C7, I'm first playing the B flat major 7 sharp 5, and then skipping up and playing a descending E half diminished, resolving to the third of D, and then skipping up to the 7 and running down the scale, and again ending on the 5th of the chord. Which arpeggio do you think really nails the sound of melodic minor? Which one do you use the most when you're improvising and using melodic minor? Because when it comes to this scale and this sound, it's not as obvious as it is with a lot of the major scale harmony that we normally talk about. So I think for me, I probably tend to gravitate a lot towards the major 7 sharp 5 and also the augmented triad. But there are other options as well. So I'm curious about this. Leave a comment on this video and let's just see what people are using. Maybe there's some new information there that's useful for a lot of people. Now that you've covered a lot of the basic material and built a strong foundation when it comes to the stuff that you need to know in melodic minor, then you probably want to take this a step further. And you can do that with this video where I'm covering some of the other structures that are really useful to know in melodic minor. So there's some chordal harmony, some spread triads, some sus4 triads, and you can make some really great sounding modern jazz lines with that.